The desert sun hadn't fully cleared the rooftops of Harwell Street when Reed Calloway rolled a rusted coupe up his driveway, towed behind a borrowed pickup, a frayed rope groaning between them. Red dust streaked the hood. The paint had peeled to bare metal in long, ugly scars. Children stopped their bikes mid-pedal. A man walking his dog froze at the corner. Sloane Mercer stood at her white picket gate, coffee in hand, smile sharpened for the audience. Her voice carried the length of the block. "You just taught your daughter how to throw money in the trash." Reed did not turn. He did not answer. He looked at the car, set his jaw, and walked inside for his tools. 5 days later, something would pull up to that same curb that no one on Harwell Street was ready to see. What was buried beneath that rust? The morning Reed Calloway found the car, he had not been looking for one. He pulled into Fenton's Desert Salvage just after 7, the Tucson air already warming over the chain-link fence and the long rows of dead vehicles bleeding rust into the sand. He needed a carburetor for a regular customer, a man who paid in folded bills and never asked for receipts, and Roy Fenton kept a shelf of usable parts behind the office trailer. That was the only reason Reed was there. He was 36, a freelance mechanic who worked out of his own garage on Harwell Street, and his Saturdays usually started in that garage, not at a salvage yard 15 miles out. But Saturdays had not been the same since Jenna died. His wife had been gone 18 months. The cancer took her in 7, and the bills it left behind had taken longer than that to even count. $47,000 in medical debt sat in a folder under the kitchen drawer, and Reed paid it down in pieces every month, the way a man bails out a boat with a coffee cup. He had not told anyone the exact number, not Dex Pruitt, his closest friend, and the owner of Pruitt's Auto 2 blocks over, not the woman from the school office who sometimes asked gently how he was holding up, not his daughter Wren, who was 8 years old and carried a stuffed rabbit named Rev wherever she went, because Jenna had named the rabbit after the sound of an engine climbing through its power band. The sound, she said, was the closest thing she knew to music. Roy Fenton was already in the yard when Reed stepped through the gate. He was sweating into a faded shirt, marking pieces of inventory with a piece of chalk, and he looked up with the tired gratitude of a man who had been dreading the day alone. "You came at the right time," Roy said. "I'm clearing a private lot. Old collector past the heirs want it gone before Monday. Whole back row goes to the crusher if I can't move it." Reed nodded. He found the carburetor on the 3rd shelf, paid in cash, and then because he had time and the morning was not yet hot, he wandered. He did not know why he wandered toward the back row. The far corner of the yard sat under a leaning sheet metal awning, half collapsed from a storm 2 summers back. The cars there were not the ones people stopped to look at. They were the ones the desert had already started to swallow. And in the deepest part of that shade, half sunken into the red Arizona sand, was a 2-door coupe. Reed stopped walking. The paint was gone, in places peeled all the way down to bare steel. Rust had eaten through the roof in a slow, dark blossom. The tires were flat and cracked, the sidewalls split open like dried fruit. By every measure that a normal man used to value a car, this one had nothing left. But Reed was not looking at the rust. He was looking at the proportions. The body was wrong for a production car of its era. The windshield raked back at an angle no factory would have approved, too steep, too aggressive, the kind of geometry a designer chose when he cared more about airflow than headroom. The rear wheel arches had been shaped by hand. He could see it without touching the metal. There was a flow to them, a deliberate sculpting that no stamping machine had ever produced. The roofline dropped toward the rear in a single, long curve that made the whole car look as though it were already moving. Reed stepped under the awning. He put his hand on the rear quarter panel before his brain told him to. The metal was cool under his palm, even in the rising heat, and he felt it the way a man feels a familiar handwriting before he reads the words. The panel was not stamped. It had been hammered by hand. Whoever had built this car had built it the way men used to build things, with patience and with a clear idea of what the finished shape was supposed to be. Roy came around the corner of the awning, wiping his hands on a rag. That one. Roy grimaced. Been there since I bought the lot. Nobody wants it. $100 take it today, or it goes Monday with the rest. Reed did not answer right away. He thought about Wren's shoes. The toes had begun to curl up at the front because she was growing faster than he was buying. He thought about the electric bill that had come yesterday in a window envelope. He thought about the $47,000 and the slow arithmetic of paying it down. And then he thought about Jenna. She had kept a sketchbook on her nightstand for the last year of her life, and in it, she had drawn cars. Not technical drawings, emotional ones. A coupe with a steeply raked windshield, a roofline falling towards sculpted rear arches drawn over and over in soft pencil, never finished, never the same, twice. He had looked at those drawings 100 times without ever asking which car she was drawing. He had assumed she was drawing from memory. He had assumed wrong about a great many things during the months Jenna was dying, and he had spent the months since trying not to assume anything at all. He counted out 5 20s from his wallet. Roy took the bills without comment, which was the kind of friend Roy was. When Reed opened the driver's door to check the interior, the hinges shrieked, and a small piece of paper fell from the lower edge of the door frame and drifted onto the sand. He bent, picked it up, slid it into his shirt pocket without looking at it. He did not know why. He only knew that he would need it later, the way a man sometimes knows the weather before the wind has changed. He called Dex from the yard. "I need a tow." "How much trouble are you in?" "Not that kind. Bring the rope." Dex arrived in his battered pickup 40 minutes later, took one look at the coupe under the awning, and let out a slow breath that was neither approval nor objection. He was not the kind of man who decided fast. He was the kind of man who watched and waited, and then, when he finally spoke, said something worth listening to. "You sure?" he said. "No," Reed said. "Bring the rope." They tied the coupe to the pickup with a length of frayed nylon and crawled back toward Harwell Street at 15 miles an hour, the rusted car wallowing on its dead tires, the rope groaning at every dip in the road. By the time they turned onto Harwell, the morning had cleared, and the whole street was awake. People looked. A boy on a bicycle braked so hard he nearly skidded. A woman watering her front lawn turned the hose down without realizing it. A man walking a small dog stopped at the corner and stayed, stopped the dog circling his ankles. Harwell Street was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone's business by Tuesday at the latest, and a rusted coupe arriving at the end of a rope on a Saturday morning was not something that would wait until Tuesday. Sloane Mercer was at her gate. She had moved into the White House across the street 14 months earlier, and in those 14 months, she had become a kind of weather system on Harwell Street, a presence that made people check their lawns and their voices before stepping outside. Her house was painted a white so clean it looked wet. Her Range Rover was always silver, always recently washed. She wore linen on weekends and held her coffee cup with both hands, as though the morning required ceremony. Once, a few months after she moved in, she had suggested to Reed, with a smile carefully arranged for the conversation, that he might be more comfortable in a different kind of neighborhood. Reed had looked at her for one full second and walked back into his house. She had decided that this was rudeness. She had been deciding things about him ever since. She was at the gate now, as if she had known the exact minute to be there. Her smile was sharpened, deliberate, the kind of smile a person practices in front of a window. Her voice carried, which was the point. "You just taught your daughter how to throw money in the trash." Reed did not turn his head. He pulled the pickup into his driveway, set the brake, and got out. He walked around to the passenger side and untied the rope with the slow care of a man who had decided not to spend any of his energy on the woman across the street. He called toward the house evenly. "Wren, bring the small tool bag from the kitchen, please." The screen door opened. Wren stepped out into the morning sun in a faded blue t-shirt, the stuffed rabbit Rev tucked under one arm, the canvas tool bag clutched in the other hand. She was small for 8, dark-haired like her mother, with the same quiet watching eyes. She walked across the driveway and handed her father the bag. Then she looked at Sloane Mercer. She did not look angry. Anger was not what an 8-year-old learned in a house that had lost a mother. She looked the way a child looks when she is memorizing something for later, the way a child looks at a map she will need to read on her own one day. She held the look for the length of one breath, too, and then she turned calmly and walked back into the house with the rabbit pressed against her shoulder. Sloane's smile did not move, but something behind it did. Reed did not see it. He was already crouching beside the coupe, running a hand along the rocker panel, feeling for the bolts that held the front wheel in place. Dex stood a few feet away with his arms folded, saying nothing, which was the most useful thing he knew how to do. That night, after Wren was asleep with Rev tucked under her chin, and the small lamp left on the way she still needed it, left on, Reed walked out to the garage and turned on the overhead light. The fluorescents hummed and steadied. The coupe sat in the middle of the bay, ugly, under the white light, every flaw lit up. He stood in the doorway for a moment, not moving. Then he picked up a wire brush and went to work. He did not know what he was looking for. He only knew that his hand had recognized the shape of the rear quarter panel before his mind had caught up, and that Jenna had drawn this car in a sketchbook he had not understood, and that his daughter had watched a woman across the street and chosen not to cry. He chose that night to trust his own hand. It was the kind of choice a man does not announce. He just begins. He worked until 2 in the morning, and the first thing the wire brush told him was the shape of a serial number. It came up out of the cabin floor under the driver's seat, where decades of grit and old carpet glue had hidden it, a row of stamped characters cut directly into the steel. Reed wiped the floor down with solvent Nelt and read it twice to be sure he had it right. The prefix was 3 letters and 2 digits, RSW69. He had been a mechanic long enough to know every standard VIN format from every era of American production. This was not one of them. The character spacing was wrong. The depth of the stamp was wrong. The position itself was wrong because no factory put a VIN in the floor pan when there were a dozen better surfaces for it. This stamp had been put there by a person who wanted it found, by someone who knew where to look, and not by anyone else. He took out his phone and texted Dex at 20 past midnight. "You ever seen a chassis number that starts with RSW and then 69? The reply came back in under a minute. "No. Go to bed." Reed did not go to bed. He pulled the slip of paper out of his shirt pocket, the one that had drifted out of the doorframe at the salvage yard, and laid it under the bench lamp. It was the lower right corner of a sticker, no bigger than a postage stamp, and most of it had been torn away. What remained was the bottom edge of a logo, a stylized wheel, and beside it a single clean flame. The lines were bold and confident, the kind of mark a designer made when he was charging by the hour and meant the work to last. It was not the kind of decal a man stuck on his streetcar for fun. It was a maker's mark. Dex came over in the morning with 2 coffees and the resigned face of a man who had known how the night was going to end. He did not speak when he came in. He pulled a creeper out from under the bench, slid himself under the front of the coupe, and stayed under there for the better part of 5 minutes. When he came out, he sat up on the floor with his elbows on his knees and looked at the car the way a man looks at something he had been told existed but had never expected to see. "That frame is reinforced by hand at every joint," he said. "You see the gusset welds? Whoever did that wasn't building a weekend project. That is months of work by somebody who knew exactly what he was doing." Reed lifted the hood. The engine block was filthy and seized, but Dex stood up and looked at it for a long moment before he spoke again. "This isn't a stock block. Somebody machined it over by hand. You can see where the casting numbers were filed off and the new bores were finished. The man who built this car had real money and real knowledge. Both, at the same time." They stood together looking at it. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, and the suspension geometry, Dex said quietly, is wrong for a streetcar. The control arm pickup points are higher than any production sedan. That's a track car. That's a purpose-built track car wearing a coupe body. Reed did not answer. He was already thinking about the sketchbook on Jenna's nightstand. He found the racing forum that afternoon. It was an old site, the kind that had been built before the modern internet got pretty all-gray backgrounds and small text and threads that had been running for 15 years without ever being archived. The members used the same usernames they had used in the early 2000s, and they spoke to each other with the careful courtesy of men who had argued about the same questions for too long to bother being rude. Reed registered an account, opened a new thread, and posted 4 photographs and a plain description. The chassis stamp, the hand-formed wheel arches, the suspension pickup points, the torn fragment of the maker's mark. He went to bed at 3. He woke at 6 and made oatmeal for Wren and walked her down to the bus stop the way he did every weekday. And when he came back into the house and checked the forum on his laptop, the thread had 52 replies. He stared at the count for a moment before he scrolled. The replies broke into 2 camps. One camp was certain that the car was a kit build from the early 1980s, the work of an enthusiast who had wanted to look like he was building a real race car without actually building one. They cited specific kit catalogs and pointed at the wheel arch curvature as evidence. The other camp, smaller and quieter, said nothing about kits at all. They asked Reed for more photographs. They asked him to measure the wheelbase. They asked him to photograph the back side of the firewall and the underside of the trunk floor. They were the kind of men who knew that the difference between a counterfeit and a real thing was almost always hidden in places no counterfeiter would think to forge. One reply from a member whose username was redline_ghost_nom was a single sentence. If that chassis number is real, you're holding something this community has been looking for 15 years. Reed read the line twice and printed the entire thread, slid the pages into a manila folder, walked into the garage, and pulled a green tarp down over the coupe. He did not know yet what he had. He only knew that the story had changed shape under his hands. It was no longer the story of a strange car. It had become the story of something that had disappeared and that somebody, somewhere, did not want found. By the 3rd day, Harwell Street knew. Dex had told his wife because 48 hours of carrying a secret that large alone had stopped being reasonable. His wife had told the woman next door, who had told the man with the small dog, who had told 3 other people by the time the afternoon mail arrived. The story had passed through 4 mouths before it reached Sloan Mercer, and along the way, it had lost its specifics and gained its shape. The shape it had arrived in when it reached her was the shape that mattered. A $100 car, a possible fortune, a single father across the street who had bought it on instinct. 2 of the neighbors knocked on the garage door that day with thin pretexts. One wanted to borrow a torque wrench he did not need. The other asked if Reed had a moment to look at a noise her car was making, and then asked the question, while standing where she could see the green tarp behind him for as long as possible. Reed handled both of them with the same patience he handled everything else. He did not lie. He did not explain. He told them he was busy and shut the door gently and went back to work. Sloan watched all of this from her kitchen window. She had been at her counter when the second neighbor walked back across the street, and she had seen the woman's face, and she had understood from the face that the rumor was not just a rumor. She set her coffee down. She opened her laptop on the counter and typed a search phrase that the rumor had given her no name, only an idea. Vintage racing prototype, missing chassis, Arizona. The search returned more than she expected. Forum threads, dead links, a few digitized articles from old enthusiast magazines. A whole quiet world of men who had been looking for something for a long time. She read for an hour. She did not close the laptop when she stood up. She left it open on the counter, the screen still glowing, and stood at the kitchen window, looking at the green tarp across the street. What moved through her then was not entirely a calculation. There was calculation in it, because Sloane had built her adult life on calculation. But underneath the calculation, there was something older and more uncomfortable. She had stood at her gate on Saturday morning and made a remark loud enough for an entire street to hear, and she had made it about an 8-year-old girl, and the girl had looked at her with a child's clear-eyed memorizing gaze and walked away. She had told herself at the time that the remark was harmless. She told herself standing at the window now that the remark was still harmless. But she could not look at the green tarp without also seeing the girl, and the two images would not separate. She went over that afternoon with a borrowed serving dish in her hands. She knocked. Reed opened the door. He did not invite her in. He stood in the doorway with the screen between them, and he listened, while she said, in a voice she had arranged carefully on the walk across, that she had been thinking about what she had said on Saturday, and that perhaps she had been hasty, and that if there was anything she could do anything at all to help with whatever he was working on. Reed heard her out. When she stopped, he looked at her without anger and without warmth. "I don't need anything, Sloane. Thank you." He closed the door. It was not slammed. It was closed, the way a man closes a door when he has decided not to spend any more of his life on a particular conversation. Sloane stood on the porch with the empty dish in her hands and felt the closed door in a way she had not expected to feel it. That night on the 4th day, Reed found the signature. He had been working on the B-pillar on the passenger side, the narrow vertical post between the front and rear doors, because Dex had pointed out earlier that the paint there sat thicker than it did anywhere else on the body. Reed took a sheet of fine sandpaper and went at it slowly, the way a man strips a piece of furniture when he wants to find what is underneath without damaging it. The top layer came off gray. The next layer came off a flat, black primer. And under the primer, a color he had never quite seen before came up into the light. It was a metallic blue-white, a very specific shade, the kind of color that did not exist in any modern paint catalog, because it had been mixed for one project and never produced again. He knew it. He could not say how he knew it. He knew it the way a man knows a song from a decade he never lived through by some path of inheritance he could not trace. He kept sanding. He worked his way around the inside face of the pillar, the face that was hidden when the door was closed, and a few inches above the latch plate the sandpaper caught on something raised. He stopped. He took a clean cloth and a bottle of solvent and worked the surface gently. And then, under the lamp, the metal gave up what had been hidden in it. It was not a sticker. It was not a riveted plate. It was a stamp, a physical impression hammered directly into the steel by a man who had wanted his work to outlast his own hands. A number 4 digits long, and beside the number, a signature 3 stylized letters joined into a single mark. OTD. Reed took photographs. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and searched for 3 hours, and at 2 in the morning in a digitized archive of an automotive trade magazine. From 1983, he found what he was looking for. The article was an obituary for a racing team. It described the dissolution of Redline Southwest Racing, which had been through the late 1970s and early 1980s, the most innovative endurance team operating out of the American Southwest. The article described their 3 Le Mans entries, their 2 class wins at Sebring, and the tragic accident at a private test session in 1981 that had killed their chief engineer. The chief engineer's name was Owen Theodore Driscoll. He had been, the article said, a man who signed his work the way an artist signs a painting, and his teammates had loved him for it. The final paragraph mentioned a single prototype. The prototype had been Driscoll's last project, a test bed for a chassis geometry theory he had spent 4 years developing. The prototype had never raced. It had been stored after Driscoll's death in a private warehouse outside Phoenix, and the warehouse had burned in October of 1983. The car had been presumed destroyed. The team had been dissolved within the month. The team had been owned and operated by Grant Holloway. Reed sat in the kitchen with the laptop open and the morning light just beginning to come in under the back door. He did not move. Then his email pinged. He looked at the screen. The sender's name was Petra Colby. The subject line read simply, "From the office of Grant Holloway." The message was 3 sentences long. Mr. Holloway had been made aware of the photographs that had been posted to a certain forum. Mr. Holloway believed that Mr. Calloway might be in possession of a vehicle of significant historical interest to him. Mr. Holloway requested a meeting at Mr. Calloway's earliest convenience. Reed read the email 3 times. He stood up. He walked out into the garage and sat down on the stool beside the car and put his phone on the workbench. Then he picked it up and called Dex. "Dex, it's 5 in the morning. I got an email from Grant Holloway's office." The line went silent on the other end. "Say that again." Slower. "I got an email." Reed said, "From Grant Holloway's office." I needed to tell somebody before I answered it. The meeting was set for Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, which made it 5 days exactly from the morning Reed had bought the car. He put on his best dark blue flannel, the one without any visible stains, and he understood how the choice would look from the outside, and he made it anyway. Ren ate her cereal at the kitchen table with Rev tucked beside her bowl, the rabbit's ears propped against the sugar dispenser, the way she always arranged him when she wanted him included. "Is somebody important coming today?" she asked. "Maybe," Reed said. "Should Rev stay out here?" He looked at his daughter for a moment longer than the question required. "Let's see what the day brings." Dex arrived at 9 without being invited, which was the way Dex understood his job in the world. He brought no coffee and no commentary. He stood in the garage doorway and watched the street and waited, because he had decided that some things needed witnesses, and that being a witness was sometimes the most useful thing a friend could do. The black Cadillac pulled up at exactly 10. From behind the front window of her house, Sloane Mercer watched it arrive. She had been at that window for 20 minutes, a coffee gone cold in her hand, and she did not move when the car door opened. She did not turn away. She watched the way a person watches something she has earned the right to watch, only by having been wrong about it first. Grant Holloway stepped out of the back of the car. He was not what Reed had expected, and at the same time, he was exactly what Reed had expected. He was lean in the careful way of a man who had spent his life around things that moved fast, his silver hair cut short, his hands carrying the weathered competence of decades of real work. He did not bring a briefcase. He did not bring an entourage. A woman in a charcoal suit stepped out of the front passenger seat with a tablet under her arm and stayed 2 steps behind him, and that was all. He walked up the driveway without ceremony. He shook Reed's hand once firmly and said only, "Mr. Calloway." Then he walked past Reed into the garage as though he had already known where he needed to stand. He stopped when he saw the car. He went around it slowly. He did not speak. He let his hand brush the rear quarter panel the way Reed had brushed it in the salvage yard, and Reed understood watching him that the 2 of them had recognized the car with the same hand. Holloway moved around to the front, looked under the hood, looked at the suspension geometry from a crouch beside the front wheel, and then walked around to the passenger side and stopped at the B-pillar. He sat down on the floor of the garage. He did not lower himself with any particular grace. He sat down because his legs had decided to sit down. He reached up and put one finger on the stamped signature in the steel, and he kept it there for the better part of a minute. He did not move. He did not speak. The garage was quiet enough that Reed could hear the refrigerator running in the kitchen at the far end of the house. When Holloway finally spoke, his voice was low and level, the voice of a man who had learned long ago not to let a voice break in front of strangers. Owen Driscoll was my chief engineer. He died in 1981. He never saw this car raced. It was never raced. It was a prototype to prove a chassis geometry theory he had worked on for 4 years. The theory was correct. It changed the way endurance frames were designed for the next 15 years, and nobody ever knew where the math came from. Holloway pushed himself up to his feet, slowly holding the edge of the door for support. He looked at the signature one more time. Owen stamped his hand into everything he built himself. He used to tell me that an engineer ought to sign his work the way an artist signs a painting. I argued with him about it. I lost the argument. Reed spoke for the first time. What happened after the fire if it didn't burn? Holloway shook his head once. I don't know. Somebody moved it before the fire, or it wasn't in the warehouse that night. I sent 2 men to look for it over the years. Different men, different decades. They came back with nothing. After the second time I stopped looking. He turned to face Reed. How did you find it? Reed told him. He did not edit the story. He did not add drama to it. He told him about the carburetor and the awning and the proportions, and about putting his hand on the rear quarter panel before his brain told him to, and about the $100 he had counted out of his wallet without being able to fully explain to himself why. Holloway listened without interrupting. Why did you buy it? He asked when Reed was done. It looked like nothing from the outside. Reed took longer with the answer than he had with anything else. I can't explain it all the way. There was something in the lines of it. It didn't look like something that had happened by accident. It looked like something a person had thought about for a long time before he started building it. Holloway studied him. Owen used almost exactly those words the first time he showed me the early sketches. The garage went quiet in the way a garage goes quiet after something true has been said and recognized. Wren appeared in the doorway, then one hand holding Rev by the ears, the other hand gripping the doorframe. She did not step in. She stood at the threshold and looked. Come here, sweetheart, Reed said. She walked in and stood beside him. She looked at the older man, and then at the car, and then at the older man. Again. She was a small girl in a faded green t-shirt, and the rabbit hung at her side, and she did not seem afraid of any of it. My dad, she said. I named it Rev. Holloway looked at the car. He looked at the name. Something moved across his face that was too small for most people to have seen, and Reed saw it because Reed had been watching for it. The older man looked back at the girl. That's a good name. Wren considered this seriously. Do you remember it a lot? The car? A great deal. My dad says if something is important to you, you remember it. The woman in the charcoal suit, Petra Colby, stepped forward then. She had been standing quietly by the open garage door, and now she walked across the concrete floor and held out the tablet toward Reed with both hands. The screen showed a single number. $5 million. Below the number, a one-page draft of a purchase agreement. Plain language, no clauses Reed would have needed a lawyer to read. Holloway spoke as Reed was looking at it. I don't negotiate things like this. That is what it is worth to a museum and to me. You can say no. You don't have to answer me today. Reed looked at the number. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the car for what he understood in that moment would be one of his last looks at it. He did not answer. Take the day, Holloway said. Take the week. Petra will leave you her number. The Cadillac pulled away 10 minutes later. Dex stood beside Reed in the driveway, and neither of them spoke for a while. That night, after Wren was asleep, Reed sat alone in the garage with the green tarp folded on the bench and the car uncovered under the fluorescent light. He thought about Jenna's sketchbook. He thought about the coupe she had drawn over and over in soft pencil, the steeply raked windshield, the sculpted rear arches. He had assumed for a year and a half that she had been drawing a car she remembered. He understood now that she might have been drawing a car she had only read about, a car she had only imagined from the few descriptions that had ever been printed of it. She had drawn it because it had been the kind of shape she loved, and she had loved it without ever knowing that the shape was real. He thought about the name his daughter had given the rabbit, and the name his daughter had given the car before she had known any of the history. The same name twice through the instinct of an 8-year-old in a garage on a Saturday morning. He picked up his phone at a little past 10 and called Petra Colby. I have one condition, he said when she answered. One. Then I'll agree. Tell me. The car has to be displayed publicly, not in a private collection. There has to be a place where ordinary people can come and see it. And on the placard on the wall next to it, Owen Driscoll's name has to be there clearly. The engineering story has to be told in plain language, the kind a person who is not a mechanic can understand. My name doesn't have to be on it. But Owen has to be remembered the right way. The line went silent. "I'll call you back," Petra said. She called back in 8 minutes. "Mr. Holloway agrees to all of it. And he wants to add one thing. He wants your daughter's name on the placard. He says the car has a name now, and the person who named it should be on the record." Reed put his hand over his eyes and stayed at the kitchen table without speaking. "Tell him thank you." A truck arrived for the car the following morning. 2 technicians strapped the chassis into a covered trailer with a care that approached reverence. The kind of care men used for things they understood were not theirs. Sloane Mercer came out of her house without anything in her hands. It was the first time in 14 months that Reed had seen her step into her front yard without a cup or a bag or a phone or some other thing to hold. She crossed the street and stopped a few feet from him and started to speak. There was nothing victorious on Reed's face. There was no satisfaction in him. There was no performance of any kind. "It's all right, Sloane," he said. "Next time you see somebody believing in something they're working on, give it 5 days before you say anything." Her mouth opened. It closed again. She did not have a reply. Reed turned back to watch the trailer doors close on the car. Wren came out onto the porch in her pajamas holding Rev. She watched the trailer pull away. She raised one hand and waved small formal, the way a child waves at something she has decided is leaving on good terms. Reed saw it from the corner of his eye, and his throat tightened in a way he had not been ready for. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, the money arrived in his account in a single transfer. He sat at his kitchen table with the laptop open and stared at the number without moving. Then he picked up his phone and called the billing department of the hospital. The call took 4 minutes. He read out the account number. He gave them the figure. He paid the medical debt his wife had left behind in full in one transaction, and he said thank you when the woman on the other end of the line had finished her sentence, and he hung up before she could say anything more. He stayed at the kitchen table afterward, both hands flat against the wood. He had carried the weight of that number for 18 months. It had sat on his shoulders during every Saturday morning at the salvage yard, and every late Friday night in the garage, and every hour of every overtime job he had taken since Jenna died. He had not let himself notice the weight, because noticing it would have meant being unable to carry it. Now in the empty kitchen, the weight was simply gone. The feeling was not victory. It was the feeling of a window being opened. In a house in winter, the air moving the room becoming lighter without anyone having moved. He bought Wren the shoes she had pointed at in a store window 7 months earlier, the right size, the right style, the ones he had watched her decide not to ask for. He bought a model kit, an endurance prototype, the kind a child could build with her father over a weekend. When he set it on the kitchen table and slid it across to her, she looked at the box and then up at him. "Can we build it together?" she asked. "Yes," Reed said. This weekend, he moved a quiet sum into Pruitt's Auto, not as an investment with paperwork, as an arrangement between 2 men who had trusted each other for a long time. Dex argued briefly out of principle, and then accepted out of principle, and then expanded the shop, added a second lift, and took on 2 apprentices before the year was out. The rest of the money he put into a fund at Wren's school. He named it the Jenna Calloway Fund. It supported families carrying the kind of debt that did not show up in yearbook photographs, the kind of debt Reed had carried in silence for a year and a half. He did not attend the dedication. He sent a letter, signed it, and declined the invitation to speak. The exhibition opened at the American Motorsport Heritage Museum in Scottsdale on a Thursday evening in the spring. Reed drove down with Wren in the passenger seat, her new shoes on her feet, Rev in her lap. Grant Holloway was already inside when they arrived. He shook Reed's hand first, then crouched down to Wren's eye level and shook hers. The car sat at the center of the gallery on a low platform lit from above by precisely calibrated lamps. The blue-white metallic paint of Owen Driscoll restored across its full body, now the color of something moving faster than it was permitted to move. The room was hushed in the way museum rooms become hushed when the exhibit has earned the silence. The placard was on the wall to the right of the car. Reed walked over to it and read it slowly. Owen Driscoll's name was on the first line in clear type. The story of the chassis geometry was told in plain language, the 4 years of work, the theory that had been proven correct, the influence that had spread through the sport for a decade and a half without anyone knowing where the math had originated. Near the end of the placard was a paragraph about how the car had been recovered decades later from a salvage yard in Tucson by a man who had recognized the value in its proportions when others had only seen rust. The final line in smaller type read, "The car was named Rev by Wren Calloway, age 8, who said it was the right name." She was correct. Wren stood in front of the car and read the line. She read it twice. She did not move from where she stood. Then, without turning around, she asked, "Dad, is Rev happy here?" Reed stood behind his daughter and looked at the car under the lights. He thought about Owen Driscoll spending 4 years building a thing he had believed in. He thought about 40 years of Arizona sand. He thought about an 8-year-old girl putting her hand on the door of a rusted coupe on a Saturday morning and listening to it. "I think so, sweetheart. More people get to see it now." Wren nodded. "Good." She reached up and took her father's hand. "Can we go eat? I want the kind with dipping sauce." Reed laughed, the real kind, the kind that came up before he could give himself permission for it, and a few people in the gallery turned to look at him without understanding why the laugh was worth turning for. "Yes, whatever you want." On Harwell Street, Sloane Mercer's house went up for rent at the end of the following month. The official reason was a new office, an inconvenient commute. The reason was true in a narrow sense. None of her neighbors said anything unkind about her departure. The justice that life occasionally delivered was rarely loud and rarely dramatic. It was simply the weight of a moment a person could not unspeak, sitting with them on quiet evenings, taking the exact shape of the words they had chosen to say out loud in front of someone who had been listening. Reed kept the garage. He kept the radio on the shelf between the wrenches and the socket set. He kept the 5 o'clock mornings and the handwritten schedule on the refrigerator, and the Friday nights with Dex, and the sandwiches and the coffee. He did not become someone else. He became a steadier version of who he already was, a man who knew with a certainty he had earned that the things worth noticing rarely announced themselves, and that the line between the valuable and the worthless was often only the willingness to stop and look closely at something the rest of the world had walked past. On quiet nights in the garage, he still talked to Jenna. Not aloud, but in the way that people who had truly loved each other continued the conversation long after the other voice had gone silent. He thought she would have recognized the car from the far corner of the salvage yard. She would have put her hand on the rear quarter panel and said simply, "I know this line." He thought she would have been proud that Wren had given it the name. He thought she would have been proud of the $100.